Big Ben is the nickname for the great bell of the striking clock at the north end of the Palace of Westminster in London, England. And the name Big Ben is usually extended to refer to both the clock and the clock tower. Without a doubt, Big Ben is the most well-known clock in the world. The current crisis has made many of us more aware of time. When people reflect on how technology has changed our lives, they usually think about the car, the television, or the computer. But according to historian and philosopher Lewis Mumford, it's really the invention of the mechanical clock that changed everything. In his 1934 classic Technics and Civilization, Mumford laid out a fascinating argument why, in his words, the clock, not the steam engine, is the key machine of the modern industrial age. The clock's increased influence began with the Christian monasteries in the Middle Ages, where monks attempted to create an environment of regularity in order to combat the disorder in the outside world, following the fall of the Roman Empire. To maintain this regularity and order, they employed the ringing of the bell 7 times a day to call the monks to prayer. As monasteries and the villages surrounding them increased in number, so did the influence of the bell ringing on human actions. The appreciated regularity of the monastery bells eventually led to the invention of mechanical clocks in the 13th century, bell towers, and clocks with a dial and a hand. The new clocks allowed for a synchronization of human activities never seen before in history. He says the effect of the mechanical clock is more pervasive and strict. It presides over the day from the hour of rising to the hour of rest. He points out that we now eat not when we feel hungry, but when we're prompted by the clock. We go to bed not when we are tired, but when the clock tells us to. Fast forwarding in time, we would say we get up not when we feel rested, but when the alarm goes off. We go to work and other appointments at particular times, established weeks and months in advance. The clock revolutionized the way people and societies function. In Ephesians 5, verse 16, the Apostle Paul tells us to make the most of your time because the days are evil. There's a statement in the 90th Psalm which serves as the basis for our lesson today. Psalm 90 is attributed to Moses and is called a lament psalm. It's a psalm that reflects upon the transience, the swiftly passing nature of life. Excuse me. The psalm contains 4 parts. Verses 1 and 2 are an affirmation of a life lived close to the Lord. Verses 3 through 6 are a complaint or a lament about the brevity of life. Verses 7 through 12 are a complaint or a lament about God's wrath and his judgment on his people. And verses 13 through 17 is a prayer for restoration. I'll read the psalm now. Psalm 90. Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You turn people back to dust, saying, return to dust, you mortals. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it is dry and withered. We are consumed by your anger and terrified by your indignation. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. All our days pass away under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. Our days may come to 70 years or 80, if our strength endures, yet the best of them are all but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. If only we knew the power of your anger. Your wrath is as great as the fear that is your due. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Relent, Lord. How long will it be? Have compassion on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love, that we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, for as many years as we have seen trouble. May your deeds be shown to your servants, your splendor to their children. May the favor of the Lord our God rest on us. Establish the work of our hands for us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. The key to the psalm is found in verses 11 and 12, which say, "If only we knew the power of your anger, your wrath is as great as the fear that is due, the fear that is your due. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom." And that's the verse we will focus on, verse 12. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. After contrasting God's eternal and powerful nature with man, who is weak and transitory, Moses' conclusion is this: the Lord is immortal, man is mortal. The Lord is above time, man is ever time conscious. The Lord is from everlasting to everlasting, but man is like the grass. So based on these truths, he says, Lord, teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And so verse 12 begins by saying, teach us. All of us need to be taught. This is true regarding all things in life, but it is especially true regarding spiritual matters. There are lots of things we can learn by experience or by watching others, but when it comes to spiritual matters, Jeremiah 10 verse 23 says, I know, O Lord, that a man's way is not in himself, nor is it in a man who walks to direct his steps. The Lord, speaking through the prophet, says in Isaiah 55 verses 8 and 9, My thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. You only have to look at the day's headlines, any day's headlines, to see the horrific mess that man makes of things when he pursues his own desires, when he follows his own passions. We need to look no further than ourselves to see the self-destructive nature of sin. We need to look no further than ourselves to see the harm we have each brought to others because we have all chosen to do things our way too many times. Augustine's statement was accurate. He said, Without thee, O Lord, what am I but a guide to my own destruction? When we follow our own paths, when we call our own shots, when we insist on doing things our way, we always bring harm and destruction to ourselves and to others. We need to be taught spiritual truths so we can rise above our instincts. We need to be taught the scriptures so we can be people who live out the teachings of God in our lives. In 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 2, the Apostle Peter tells us, As newborn babes, desire the pure milk of the word, that you may grow thereby. One survey indicates that only 11% of Americans read their Bibles daily. We have a society which claims some belief in the Bible, but it's basically ignorant of what the Bible teaches. Generally speaking, that's not our problem. We are typically well aware of what the Bible teaches. Our challenge is to fight against the tendency to be hearers only and not doers of the word. We know the passages that teach us to be people of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, to bear with each other and to forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone, to forgive as the Lord forgave you. We know about the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Our problem is not ignorance. Our problem is application. And we need to be taught to do better. Verse 12 says, Teach us to number our days. The psalmist tells us to do something we cannot do. We don't know how long we have to live. We don't know how many days we have left, so how can we number them? But that's not really what he means. Numbering your days does not mean just counting them or being aware of how long you're going to live. It's more the idea of what we mean when we say, use your time wisely. The psalmist means that we need to realize that life passes rapidly. Verses 3 through 6 and verse 10 of Psalm 90 says, You turn people back to dust, saying, Return to dust, you mortals. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it is dry and withered. Verse 10 says, Our days may come to 70 years or 80, if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass, and we fly away. Job 14 verses 1 and 2 says, Mortals born of woman are of few days and full of trouble. They spring up like flowers and wither away. Like fleeting shadows, they do not endure. The psalmist means that we need to realize that you can lose your life at any time. The rich fool in Luke 12 that we talked about just a few weeks ago thought he had many years, when in fact he didn't have one more day. The psalmist means that we need to realize that death will come, that death is inevitable. Ecclesiastes 9 verse 5 says, The living know that they will die. Hebrews 9 verse 27 says, It is appointed for men to die once, but after this the judgment. So he's telling us not only to be aware of the brevity and the frailty of life, but also to be aware of our dependence upon and our ultimate accountability to the eternal God. Some of us act as if we're going to live forever. We downplay the impact and the importance of our lives. We downplay the destructive power of sinful attitudes, sinful thoughts, and sinful behaviors. We tend to view them as trite little mistakes that we should not allow, instead of seeing them as egregious infractions that separate us from a holy God and that destroy us and those who are affected by them. We need to live every day as if it were our last. As a popular song said a few years ago, we need to live like we are dying. Because guess what? We are. Verse 12 says, Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. The psalmist is telling us that by numbering our days, we will be able to live wisely. Notice the connection in Colossians 4 verse 5 where Paul says to walk in wisdom toward those who are outside, redeeming the time. And in Ephesians 5 verses 15 and 16, Paul says, Be careful then how you live, not as unwise but as wise, making the most of your time, because the days are evil. Time is precious, and time should not be wasted. Benjamin Franklin said, If time is of all things most precious, then wasting time is the greatest form of wastefulness. If we are careless with our days, if we are careless with our time, if we view our time as our time to squander as we wish, we will not take on the image of Christ. We will not glorify God. As we live our lives, or let me put it this way, if we were to live our lives looking backward, what would we change? There are lots of sayings that reflect this. We say hindsight's 20/20. I wish I knew back then what I know now. But what would we change if we could go back and do things over again? To apply our hearts to wisdom is to realize that some things are more important than others. God, family, relationships. Someone has said many of us spend our lives chasing rainbows that even if we could catch them, would be worthless to us. All of us learn this lesson many times throughout our lives. We want something. We think we have to have it. We can't be satisfied till we get it. So we work, we scrimp, and we save up until we can buy it. Then within a few days or a few weeks, it's just another item on the shelf. We're often unwise because we give our time to the things that seem to be urgent while we ignore the things that are truly important. We need to be careful that we don't let the things that are urgent day by day crowd out the important things of life, or we may wake up one day and find that we have wasted most of our lives on trivialities. We like to think that we are masters of time, but we're constantly reminded that that is a fallacy. There are times when time seems to just go rushing by, and other times when the clock seems to stand still. There are times when we are very much aware of time, such as when we're working on a project with a deadline, racing the clock, fighting against time. And then there are those wonderful times when we let go of our watches and clocks and enjoy a day of leisure and rest, and we hardly even notice the passing of time at all. Benjamin Franklin said again, "Do you love life? Then do not squander time, for time is the stuff life is made of." When we make our time count, we make our life count, because time is the stuff life is made of. It's interesting that every person, we might call time the great equalizer, or one of the great equalizers. Every person gets the same amount of time each day. Doesn't matter how rich or poor you are. It doesn't matter how young or old you are. It doesn't matter what continent you live on. It doesn't matter whether you live in the city or in the country. Your race, your gender are irrelevant. Each person on planet Earth gets the exact same amount of time each day. A number of years ago, back in 2013, in fact, one news source told about a new invention. It said, inventors are working on a new technology that could literally tell you how much longer you have to live. The wristwatch-like contraption, which has been called the Death Test Watch, measures vital cells inside your capillaries. Those cells produce chemicals that identify what's going wrong with your body, including whether you'll have a stroke, a heart attack, or dementia. The watch can also tell if you have cancer and how fast your body is aging. There are certain characteristics about this invention, the article goes on to say, such as the fear that life insurance companies could use the information to alter a person's premiums and payouts. But the hope is that people would use the watch to better their health and improve their lives. But it says there's also concern that the device may lead to depression. No, you think? You never know what's going to happen tomorrow. The current situation the world finds itself in makes that abundantly clear. Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 2 says, "It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of a feast. For that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart." In our vernacular, in our language, the preacher is saying it's better to go to a funeral than a party. Parties and celebrations have their place, but a funeral will help us reflect upon the inevitable. And by reflecting upon the grave, we should be made to reflect upon how we are living. Am I living wisely? Are you living wisely? Are we using our time wisely? Are we using our time to ensure that we are growing spiritually? Are we numbering our days? That's the question. And that's the encouragement for us today.